Your colleague, Bernie Sanders of Vermont, another senator, announced he was going to also run for president from the other party. What's your appraisal of his candidacy, and can we hear your very good and very respectful imitation of Senator Sanders?
Well, I think I'll avoid the business of trying to do imitations of my colleagues, but I will say, I certainly welcome Bernie Sanders to the race, and I'll give him credit for candor. Bernie Sanders ran for years as a socialist. He was on the ballot in Vermont. He said, look, Democrat didn't quite describe him. He ran as a socialist. I think that's honest and straightforward, and it'll be a healthy debate for Democrats to have as just to what degree of socialism they want to embrace. I think Hillary's economic policies often end up pretty close to Bernie Sanders, and it'll be interesting having her explain whether or not she agrees with Bernie Sanders with policies that he'll describe as socialist, and whether she thinks that those are good policies for this country.
All right, Senator, part of the reason we wanted to talk to you today was a speech you gave yesterday to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I know Al knows that a big part of your argument in terms of the party's appeal to Hispanic voters is simply talking about an economic agenda that you think should appeal to them. But let me ask you, it seems to me your last name is Cruz and you're from Texas. Just based on that, should you have appeal to Hispanic voters?
Well, I'll tell you, when I ran for Senate in Texas, I was very proud to receive 40% of the Hispanic vote in Texas. And that was at the same time that Mitt Romney was getting clobbered with just 27% of the Hispanic vote nationwide. And I think the reason is that my family story, my personal experience is an experience that resonates in the Hispanic community. In 1957, my dad fled Cuba. He was penniless. He couldn't speak English. He'd been in prison. He'd been tortured. He had just $100 in his underwear, and he washed dishes, making 50 cents an hour, paid his way through school, went on to start a small business. Today he's a pastor. And that experience, my dad is my hero, and his story is emblematic of all of our stories. Every one of us. Mark, you have a story like that in your background. All of us, it's who we are as Americans, and in my experience, that personal experience resonates powerfully in the Hispanic community. And the reason I'm in politics is to fight for people like my dad, teenage immigrants, washing dishes, trying to achieve the American dream, and they're the ones that are getting hurt right now under the Obama economy.
Senator, people are really interested in you and your identity, so I just want to ask you, as a historical matter, when you filled out your application to Princeton, to Harvard Law School, did you list yourself as an Hispanic?
Oh, sure. I've listed myself as Cuban American. That's my heritage and my background.
Okay. Al?
Senator, let's stay on the immigration issue for a second. If elected as president, would you repeal President Obama's 2012 executive order on Dreamers, young immigrants who came here, stayed here, and met certain conditions? Would you repeal that?
I have committed, if I'm elected president, that on the first day, I intend to rescind every illegal and unconstitutional executive action that President Obama put into place. One of the greatest negative consequences of the Obama administration has been the injury to rule of law. We've never seen a president who so routinely declines to enforce the Constitution or enforce the law. If you want to see positive improvements on... If you want to see positive improvements, whether it is on immigration or any other topic, the right way to do so is to change the law. There was legislation...
Specifically, would that include the Dreamers?
Well, every executive action the president has taken that exceeds his constitutional authority, that disregards the law, it would be my intention to rescind. My first obligation is to defend the Constitution and defend the American people. And there is a proper way to change the law, and there's an improper way to change the law.
I assume that includes the Dreamers. Let me ask you one more question. Congressman Stephen King of Iowa has proposed narrowing the 14th Amendment so it would not give automatic citizenship to what he calls anchor babies. He says mothers come here and to have kids who become citizens. Do you support or oppose that sort of legislation?
I think when it comes to immigration, the proper way to go forward is to focus on areas of common ground. And when it comes to common ground, there are a lot of areas where the American people are in agreement, in bipartisan agreement. There is overwhelming bipartisan agreement outside of Washington that we got to get serious about securing the borders, that we need to solve illegal immigration. There's overwhelming bipartisan agreement that amnesty is wrong. And there is considerable bipartisan agreement outside of Washington that we need to improve and streamline legal immigration, that we need to focus on.
Congressman King's proposal, up or down, Senator?
Look, I understand you want to talk about that, but I'm telling you what I want to talk about. If you want to pass immigration reform, you focus where there's common ground. Where I've focused is on common ground and ways to bring us together.
I want to close with talk a little bit more about your Cuban heritage and ask you in the following categories whether you have an affinity for or a connection to anything part of your Cuban past. You got a favorite Cuban food, Cuban dish?
Oh, I grew up eating Cuban food all the time.
What's your
my
favorite
grandparents,
dish?
You know, picadillo. I grew up eating all the time. We had plantains. We had beans and rice. For Christmas, we would roast a whole pig a lot of years for Christmas Eve. And so my grandparents, my abuelo and abuela, they didn't speak English, and my abuela was an incredible cook.
All right, favorite. You like Cuban music? Do you have a favorite Cuban singer?
You know, I have to admit, in that I'm much more of a Texan. I tend to listen to country music more than Cuban music.
All right. And finally, on the political front, Senator, what is your aspiration for the Republican presidential nominee in 2016? What percentage of the Hispanic vote, Latino vote, would you think the party could get?
Look, ideally, I think the Republican Party should be winning a majority of the Hispanic vote. We haven't historically been able to do that. But if you look at who has been hurt under the Obama economy, the Hispanic community has been hammered. It is far worse off. The rich are doing great under the Obama economy, but the most vulnerable, young people, Hispanics, African Americans, single moms, their lives have gotten harder and harder and harder. And I intend to campaign in the Hispanic community and across this country on expanding jobs and growth and opportunity for everyone to achieve the American dream. And I also intend to campaign vigorously on school choice, which I think is the civil rights issue of the 21st century, that every child, regardless of race, ethnicity, wealth, or zip code, deserves an opportunity to receive an excellent education.
All right, finally, I wanted to give you the opportunity to directly welcome your colleague, Senator Sanders, to the race, and I'd like you to do it, if you would, en español.
You know, I'm going to stick to English, but I appreciate the invitation, senor.
All right.